The House at Mickelby Chase, by T.B. Myers, England, 1932. When a reclusive heiress is found dead in her locked study at Mickelby Chase, Inspector Lang is summoned to unravel the seemingly impossible crime. With his sharp eye for detail and his trusted colleague Morrow, Lang must navigate family secrets, hidden passages, and a web of motives in this classic country house mystery. Chapter 1. The house at Mickelby Chase stood defiant against the storm's savage fury, its jagged Gothic spires piercing the turbulent heavens like the ribs of a leviathan risen from deep depths to defy the heavenly wrath above. Thunder growled low and ominous from the horizon, a guttural vibration that seeped through the ancient stone foundations, resonating in the bones of the manor as if the earth itself stirred in restless slumber. Rain hammered the leaded panes of the windows in merciless barrages, transforming the outside world into a blurred haze of sodden meadows and twisted oaks, their leaves stripped and flung like confetti from a funeral procession. Within the fortified embrace of her mahogany-panelled study, Mrs. Lavinia Mickelby sat enthroned at her colossal desk, a vast monolith carved from timber hewn in the shadowed forests of colonial eras past, its surface etched with swirling veins of deep burgundy and ebony, polished to a mirror sheen that captured the erratic dance of flames from the cavernous hearth. The air hung thick with the musty richness of aged leather from the towering bookshelves, the golden sweetness of beeswax candles, and the sharp tang of fresh ink from the letters she perused with a furrowed brow. A soft knock echoed through the room, and the door creaked open to reveal Rajiv, her faithful servant, balancing a silver tray laden with tea and a folded note. He stepped inside with measured deference, his dark eyes scanning the storm-lashed windows before settling on his mistress. "Madam, I have brought your Darjeeling tea, and news from the village post," he said, his voice steady yet watchful as he approached the desk. Lavinia lifted her gaze from the parchment, her posture unyielding as ever, and fixed him with a piercing stare. "Rajiv, you tarry like a sluggard in a downpour. Set it down at once and be quick about it," she commanded, her tone sharp as a duelist's blade, brooking no delay. He placed the tray upon the desk with precise care, his movements fluid and attentive, though his eyes flickered to the letters scattered before her. "As you wish, madam. The storm shows no sign of abating. I thought the tea might steady your hand against it." His words carried a loyal undertone, observant of her every tension. She poured the tea herself, her fingers steady despite the years, and waved him closer with an imperious gesture. "These missives from my kin are nothing but vipers in velvet, Rajiv, plots and petty grievances clawing at what I've built. Mark my words, loyalty is a rare currency in this family, and they squander it like fools." Her voice dripped with disdain, hinting at the shadows of betrayal that loomed over her lineage. Rajiv nodded, his expression unchanging save for a subtle narrowing of his eyes, as he stepped back toward the door. "I shall ensure no intruders disturb you further, madam," he replied, his loyalty evident in the quiet resolve of his stance. At 78 years of age, Lavinia embodied frailty not as weakness but as a weapon, her silver hair coiled in an iron-wrought chignon, her spine a ramrod of imperial will amidst the flickering candlelight. Its blade, whetted to a lethal whisper, had passed down from her grandfather, a coal baron whose ink-stained ledgers had changed black dust and belching steam into dynastic wealth. Before her loomed the stack of envelopes, a teetering ziggurat of vellum and wax, each one a barbed missile launched from distant lairs, converging on her throat with predatory intent. She plucked the uppermost. Richard's, with the cold detachment of an executioner selecting his hempen cord from the gibbet. The envelope was premium vellum, pale and substantial as cream poured thick, yet as her knife whispered along the sealed flap, a subtle rasp arose, the blade snagging faintly on irregularities beneath the surface. She paused, her breath steady, the cool metal warming against her palm from prolonged grip. With exquisite care, she extracted the single folded sheet, the paper yielding with a soft, papery sigh that stirred the candle flames into brief agitation. Unfolding it revealed a script striving for aristocratic flourish but undermined by telltale haste. Ink smudges blotched the margins like bruises from a brawl, dark splotches where the pen had faltered over deletions, Bold strike-throughs slashed viciously only to be overwritten with cramped insertions that bled into the weave. At the corner, a minute tear gaped like a fresh wound, fibers frayed where the nib had gouged too deeply in frantic revision. A hurried forgery, her mind diagnosed instantly, the evidence as damning as fingerprints on a blade. "Dearest Aunt Lavinia," the letter began, the greeting sprawling in an ostentatious loop that coiled back sinuously its tail. "Your devoted nephew Richard beseeches your wisdom and boundless generosity in this most pressing hour of need. The capricious fortunes of trade have turned their fickle faces from us, yet family bonds remain the unyielding anchor of our souls. Might I presume upon your legendary hospitality at Mickelby Chase for a brief sojourn, there to discuss matters profoundly close to our shared hearts?" Lavinia's lips drew into a thin, colorless line, the delicate creases radiating from her mouth tightening like dry riverbeds in drought. Hurried forgery indeed, she pondered, her thoughts slicing through the verbiage with clinical precision, dissecting each borrowed phrase as if vivisecting a cadaver. The rhetoric stank of pilfered grandeur. Passages lifted verbatim from some threadbare volume of epistolary etiquette, the seams showing in the unnatural cadence. Richard, her nephew at 35, was the uncanny echo of his father, her first husband's wastrel sibling. Tall and dashing with a rogue's charm, his smile a gilded snare that lured purses from the tightest grips, his eyes flickering with the perpetual vigilance of prey sensing the trap's snap. The salons of London buzzed with his notoriety. Chronicler of dead-end pursuits, his current shadowy enterprise whispered to thrive in opium dens and faro pits, where fortunes evaporated like morning mist. She conjured him vividly, slouched against a soot-grimed mantel in a fog-choked club, rehearsing this very plea before a fogged mirror, beads of perspiration tracing icy paths down his temples despite the drafty chill seeping through ill-fitting windows. His breath would quicken with each recitation, the mirror misting under exhales laced with cheap brandy, his fingers trembling as they clutched the pen in that cramped rented room above a bawdy house. The paper knife met the desk with a resonant tap, the silver striking polished mahogany in a chime that reverberated through the panelled walls, akin to the inexorable tick of a chronometer counting down to cataclysm. Tap. The vibration hummed up her arm, a tactile anchor amid the storm's escalating roar outside, where wind-whipped branches scraped the glass with bony desperation, nails on slate. Tap. Tap. The rhythm steadied her pulse, each impact sending faint tremors through the wood, dislodging microscopic motes of dust that swirled in the firelight. The boy was always a gambler at heart. She murmured to the room's encroaching shadows, her voice a crisp, low-register remnant of long-vanished Etonian pedagogues, each syllable landing like a judge's gavel. The words lingered, eddying in the heavy air, coaxing the candle wicks to sputter and leap in erratic sympathy. Unbidden memories flooded her. Richard at 10, his cherubic face smeared with pilfered jam from the pantry raids, eyes wide with feigned innocence as he licked sticky fingers clean. At 20, stumbling through the manor's grand doors hatless and winded from a night at the hazard tables, collapsing to one knee with histrionic promises of redemption, his coat reeking of stale tobacco and desperation sweat. His father's demise replayed in merciless detail, a pauper's end in a sponging house, surrounded by scattered cards like autumn detritus, his final rattle echoing in Lavinia's mind as vividly as the thunder now splitting the sky. No, this time his mama's farce would shatter against her unbreachable ramparts. She trailed a fingertip along a smudged margin, the gritty ink residue adhering to her skin like damning ash, a physical echo of his fraying facade. Tap, tap, the cadence quickened, her wrist flexing with increasing vigor, the desk's surface accruing faint scars like battle honors, her contempt carving furrows into the unyielding grain. A thunderclap detonated directly overhead, the shockwave rattling the crystal decanter on its silver tray, amber sherry sloshing perilously close to the rim. Lavinia allowed a slender breath to escape, her chest rising and falling in measured cadence. The vultures had commenced their inexorable waltz. Her fingers, chilled and implacable as marble, extended to the subsequent envelope, Geoffrey and Diana's joint entreaty. The stationery was paltry, a flimsy grade that crackled brittly under her touch, the wax seal as uneven crimson clot, applied in haste and now desiccated into fragility. As the knife pressed, the seal shattered with a sharp, percussive pop, fragments scattering across the green leather blotter like flakes of congealed gore. Cost-cutting in its rawest form, she catalogued dispassionately, her nostrils dilating to inhale the bifurcated olfactory assault that erupted. Diana's tawdry perfume, a cloying miasma of wilted lilies and artificial ambergris that adhered like sodden fleece to the air, clashing violently with Geoffrey's perpetual aura of laboratory phantoms. Bitter almond essence intertwined with the pungent sting of volatilizing ethers and sulfurous residues, an indelible chemical spectre embedded in his pores despite frantic ablutions. The missive unfurled with a frail rustle, Geoffrey's angular block letters domineering the page, interrupted sporadically by Diana's florid curlicues at the close. "Beloved Aunt Lavinia," it declared, "our marriage, once a bastion against the world's tempests, now strains beneath the relentless pressures of city life. A restorative respite at the hallowed halls of Mickelby Chase would mend our frayed spirits, and perchance your sage guidance on matters of inheritance might secure the future we so richly deserve." Lavinia's posture rigidified, her shoulders rolling back as if steeling against an arctic blast, vertebrae aligning with audible internal clicks. Marital discord screamed from every penstroke, the collaborative pretense a sham, their clashing sense a battlefield strewn with broken truces. Geoffrey, the discarded chemist idling through his late 30s, projected a hearty bluffness that concealed towering ledgers of arrears and a squalid liaison with a Whitechapel stenographer, her typewriter clacks haunting his guilty nights. Diana, the niece in her middling years, exuded a vapid seductiveness. Breathless whispers and artful tresses twirled like lures, her eyes scanning perpetually for matrimonial egress. Lavinia envisioned their domestic tableau. Diana's heated sighs, fogging breakfast pains during perfunctory caresses, her manicured nails grazing lapels with predatory intent. Geoffrey's blusterous guffaws punctuating nervous pipe tampings, perspiration perpetually pearling his broad forehead, the air between them crackling with unspoken barbs. Tap, tap, the knife hammered with renewed force, excavating a hairline indentation from the desk's lustrous face, the wood emitting a protesting creak like a stifled groan. "Funds, that's their true quarry," she announced to the vacant room, reclining slightly as her voice cleaved the hush like glacial fracture. Vultures wheeling above the dying beast, talons honed for the rip. The tempest responded with a howling surge, casements shuddering, until the leaded glass vibrated in resonant hum, rain pummeling the sills in a demented percussion. She glanced up as the door creaked open, revealing Edward's shadowed figure in the doorway. "You think I don't see through you?" she said, her voice low and edged with suspicion, the knife stilling in her hand for a brief moment. He shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to the letter on the desk. "I'm just here to talk, nothing more," he replied, his tone defensive as he stepped inside, the storm's howl underscoring his words. She narrowed her eyes, tapping the knife once more with deliberate force. "Talk, or to claim your share before the others do?" she shot back, her fingers tightening around the handle. With meticulous folds, she restored the letter to its envelope, the crinkling amplification of her determination, the discordant scents persisting like indictments in the stagnant atmosphere. Tap, 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 the metronome of verdict intensified, her heartbeat entraining to its relentless pulse, veins thrumming in her temples. Lightning veined the firmament beyond the windows, bathing the study in electric starkness. Intricate brass astrolabes from bygone navigations gleamed coldly, porcelain miniatures from Canton glowed with delicate translucence, and the sepia portrait of her first husband scowled from its mantel perch, eyes unblinking sentinels. Lavinia's stare lingered on those painted orbs, unyielding as quarry stone. "You've bequeathed me this flock of parasites," she reflected, a sardonic curl ghosting her lips. The hearth fire crackled sharply, embers ascending in fleeting pyrotechnics, their ephemeral glow mocking the ephemeral aspirations these epistles proffered. Beatrice's correspondence ascended next in the pile, its envelope impeccably starched, emblazoned with the heraldic insignia of some parochial gentry league. The paper knife traversed flawlessly, but as the contents spilled forth, Lavinia's gaze hooked on the savage underlines raking phrases like cavalry sabers, pure bloodline *, ancestral sanctity *, foreign corruptions. Ink hemorrhaged from the pen's brutal indentations, inky rivulets infiltrating the paper's texture, manifesting as mottled discolorations that suggested suppurating lesions. Dear Cousin Lavinia, it opened with prim exactitude. The sacred family tree of the Mickelbys must be vigilantly protected from the encroaching fancies of lesser stocks. I arrive not as a supplicant, but as a guardian, to uphold our untainted legacy. Discretion in your dispositions is paramount. Times. Xenophobic bile, Lavinia adjudged, her bearing transmuting to the inflexibility of tempered alloy. The ink's seepage mirrored Beatrice's essence, ossified, oozing bigotry into every crevice it invaded. The cousin, a ghostly fixture in her 50s, had shadowed family gatherings since adolescence. Pearl-clasped gasps at supper discourse, frosty stares impaling domestics with suspect inflections, her reticule clamped against arms like a bear trap. A protracted tea soirée resurfaced in memory, Beatrice's tones dripping vitriol as she assailed Lavinia's second husband's oriental trade webs. Blood reveals its truth, and taints the stream beyond reclamation. Lavinia had watched the teacup tremble in her grip then, steam rising like suppressed fury, the silver spoon clinking rhythmically against porcelain as Beatrice pontificated, her jowls quivering with zeal. This edifice has beheld purer fables, pulverized on stonier shores than your prattle. Lavinia breathed, the utterance emerging as vapor from a cauldron simmered over long. Her knife accelerated to a machine gun tattoo. Tap, 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 the reverberations caroming from the coffered ceiling like musketry. She elevated the sheet toward the hearth's glow, observing the blots intensify in umbra, shadows pooling like congealing malice. You clutch your pedigrees as wards, oblivious to the hybrid vitality that mortared these battlements. Thunder pealed in corroboration, the chamber quaking as if Mickelby Chase itself shrank from the affront. Ravi's dispatch from Bombay tugged insistently next, its envelope subtly buckled at the margins, the postage stamp from the torrid harbour lifting in irregular curls, victim to the humid odyssey across vast seas. As she incised it, an exotic bouquet unfurled, sandalwood's pine-rich depth mingled with monsoon-thick loam, evoking bazaars alive with haggling and spice pyres. The interior overflowed with aphorisms, Ravi's calligraphy undulating in sinuous waves. Dearest Auntie, as the elephant treads oblivious through the salon, crushing delicate deceptions, thus does commerce's inexorable advance expose the verity of avarice. Your matchless acumen is the seed capital for ventures righteous, honoring our entwined blood. Lavinia's nostrils expanded in a purposeful inhalation, savoring the fusion of cardamom whispers and brine-kissed gales. Commercial astuteness cloaking rapacious legacy lust, she appraised with reluctant esteem. Ravi, kin through labyrinthine branches, prowled corporate arenas with obsequious palms and deliberate, stalking gaits, his accented saws lulling adversaries pre-ambush. She foresaw his ingress, habited in lustrous silk, inclining with calibrated humility, obsidian eyes sparkling under crystal pendants. Tap, tap, the blade adopted a ruminative tempo, its timbre threading the gale's serenade. Astute Ravi, spinning thin from chaff, she said sotto voce, fingertips grazing the flaking stamp, particles crumbling to talcum under pressure, yet pachyderm's imprint trails too blatant to elude. Reminiscences welled. Juvenile Ravi during a garden sojourn, declaiming parables amid rose arbors, already auctioning agates as commodity futures, his small hands gesturing with embryonic guile. The deluge eased to a murmur, bestowing illusory tranquility upon the chamber. Nor's billet arrived featherlight thereafter, drifting deskward like an injured lunar moth. Nestled within lay a rendering of Mickelby Chase, vigorous charcoal hashes delineating the spire's audacity, the draftsman's fervour manifest in dense umbrage. Extracting it, dusted her digits with pulverulent ebony, besmirching her patrician pallor with insistent grime. The epistle alluded to Parisian pecuniary gales. Chère Aunt Lavinia, your erstwhile munificence kindled my palate. Amidst Montmartre's monetary maelstroms, a humble bequest would buttress my easel against entropy's onslaught. Peremptory bundling accounted for the signature's obscuring smudges. Lavinia mulled, dabbing her hands on a crisp linen that bloomed streaked as battle ochre. Nor's tempestuous zeal throbbed in every stroke, scorching rages, birthing nocturnal masterpieces, folios crammed in ateliers reeking of turp and absinthe. Circumspection knotted her viscera. the girl's noble veneer sheathed bohemian abandon. Victor's missive thudded final, slamming deskwood with pugilistic heft. The penmanship jagged as scree, Cyrillic arabesques hemorrhaging into Anglo-Saxon, polyglot frenzy, muddling spurious ancestry vouchers into illegible morass. Falsehoods into czars and aunts indifferently. My Mickelby ancestress is vain, mandates equity at length. Distrust roiled like disturbed silt. Victor, ursine stalker with mistrust furrowing every grimace, mallet-fisted roars gravelling his philippics. Silence enveloped then, the storm's rage subsiding to a dirge-like wail. Lavinia hefted the sherry schooner, pristine till now, its prismatic crystal splintering amber luminescence. The elixir caressed her lips with chill silkiness, efflorescing on her palate in waves of sun-dried figs, toasted hazelnuts, and faint oaken whisper. Gusts recommenced battering casements, avarice's currents vortexing in her psyche, akin to the draft's profundities. She protracted the interlude, gaze entranced by the blaze's mesmeric pirouette, embers popping softly, warmth radiating to thaw her chilled extremities. Her grasp engulfed a nondescript envelope, barren, its wax unpretentious, affecting indifference. She crushed it, vellum surrendering in corrugated protest, seal bursting to liberate a subtle, putrid bouquet, vulture essence, ratifying the clan's orbital siege. Her carriage ossified to indomitable granite, eschewing solitary convocations. Caution, she seized the brass bell, tolling it with incisive clangor, its brazen clarion cleaving the ether, reverberations pledging her to the turbulent conclave. Rajiv apparated with phantasmagoric fluidity, his livery pristine as fresh-pressed broadcloth, raven locks oiled to gloss, obsidian eyes mirroring arcane perspicacity, his turban a crown of midnight brocade. Mrs. Mickelby? His inflection draped velvet over tempered steel, one eyebrow arching in nuanced interrogation, hands folded at waist in poised deference, the faint scent of attar and polished leather trailing him. Lavinia met his gaze squarely, her knife resuming its staccato tap, 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 a counterpoint to the rain's renewed tattoo. She weighed his presence, this shadowkin who had stewarded Mickelby Chase through decades of her caprices, his loyalty a silent fortress amid the family's tempests. Summon them all, Rajiv, she commanded, her timbre unyielding as quarry frost, chin lifting imperiously. Internally, a flicker of calculation stirred. Individual probings might reveal fractures, but a collective summons would ignite the true pyre, exposing alliances in the crucible. Rajiv's expression tightened, a glint of comprehension passing like summer lightning. He inclined his head a precise degree, turban's jewel catching firelight. All of them, ma'am, even Victor with his enthusiasms, and young Noor, whose trunks invariably arrive encrusted in seen silt. His tone, threaded wry caution, fingers twitching subtly as if tallying the chaos, body shifting weight from one polished boot to the other, the turkey rug muffling the creak. She permitted a glacial smile, the emerald ring winking as her hand gestured dismissively. Precisely all, Rajiv. Let the full flock descend. I've no patience for piecemeal dissections when the carcass lies whole. Her mind raced ahead. Richard's oily charm clashing with Victor's bellows, Beatrice's sneers dueling Ravi's proverbs. Oh, the plumage would molt spectacularly. The storm's howl underscored her resolve, wind shrieking through eaves like harbingers. He paused, lips pursing in momentary cogitation, then nodded deeper, a bow laced with conspiratorial kinship. As you decree, ma'am. The wires shall fly before dawn. East wing suites, I presume. Or shall we barricade the west against excessive vigor? A ghost of amusement quirked his mouth, eyes flicking to the crumpled envelope, nostrils flaring at its lingering fetor. East wing, emphatically, she retorted, leaning forward, knife pausing mid-tap to point emphatically. And augment the sherry casks twofold. Mistrust festers in abstinence. The larder endures as is. Let privation hone their appetites, lest they grow torpid. Emotion layered her words. A thrill of anticipation coiled in her breast, mingled with the old wariness of bloodkin turned scavengers, her pulse quickening as memories of past incursions replayed. Quarrels echoing through halls, slammed doors vibrating tapestries. Rajiv's chuckle emerged as a subterranean rumble, swiftly quelled. Sagacity incarnate, ma'am. Paranoia indeed blooms lush on barren soil. He straightened, posture impeccable, yet his gaze lingered, probing for fractures in her armor. A silent query. "Are you fortified for this maelstrom?" She held it, until he pivoted, footsteps a hushed cadence on the opulent rug, the door latching with a decisive click that sealed the pact. Lavinia observed his egress, the knife tolling a culminating, defiant refrain, tap tap tap, sing-sing with thunder's retreating grumble. The convocation would test fidelities within the gale's clinch, and Mickelby Chase, weathered sentinel, would persist unbowed. The fire surged anew, casting elongated shadows that danced like spectres across the panelled walls, the air thrumming with portent. She settled back, fingers steepled, savouring the precipice's vertigo, the vultures, shadows lengthening across her domain. As Lavinia sealed the last letter, a floorboard creaked in the hallway outside. She held her breath. Someone had been listening at the door, and they now knew exactly what she planned to reveal. Chapter 2. The grand foyer of Mickelby Chase stretched out like a vast shadowed cavern hewn from an opulent past, its towering walls clad in oak paneling, polished to a mirror-like sheen that twisted the reflections of its occupants into tall, ghostly distortions. Faces stretched into eerie, elongated masks beneath the chandelier's wavering glow. That colossal fixture dangled from the vaulted ceiling like a crystalline waterfall frozen mid-plunge, its countless prisms fracturing the subdued electric light into a mesmerizing dance of warm amber and molten gold. The patterns flickered and swayed lazily across the intricate plaster cornices overhead, casting shifting shadows that mimicked the restless motion of the storm outside. Sheets of rain lashed the leaded glass windows in relentless barrages, the sound evolving from delicate needle-sharp patters to deep, resonant thuds that vibrated through the frames, sending faint tremors into the bones of those gathered within. Ferocious wind gusts howled through the eaves like tormented spirits, sneaking icy fingers under door seals and stirring the stagnant air with sudden chills that prickled the skin on necks and arms. The drafts carried the sharp, mineral tang of storm-soaked earth, and the heavy, cloying sweetness of decaying leaves from the estate's overgrown gardens, where thorny brambles clawed at the night. Inside, the air hung thick with layered scents, the clean, waxy aroma of beeswax polish freshly applied to tabletops and chair arms that morning, the lingering bite of pipe tobacco smouldering faintly in a porcelain ashtray, its grey curls twisting lazily upward, the faint mustiness of heavy velvet draperies, faded to a soft mauve by decades of sunlight filtering through the panes, and the subtle, powdery drift of dust rising from the frayed edges of ancient Persian rugs, their once brilliant motifs now blurred into dreamlike patterns by the footsteps of generations. On the mahogany sideboard, crystal decanters stood in rigid formation, their faceted surfaces snaring the ruddy light from a solitary table lamp and flinging it back in sharp rainbows that etched fleeting patterns across the walls, a spark of defiance amid the encroaching gloom. An unspoken tension thick the room, as dense and heavy as the sultry pause before a thunderclap, coiling tighter with every low rumble that shuddered through the oaken floorboards. The decanters hummed faintly in response, their crystal stems vibrating, while the air itself seemed charged with the electric hum of unspoken grudges, waiting to ignite. The massive oak front door exploded inward with a deep, booming thud that reverberated like cannon, fire off the panelled walls, slamming against its stops and heralding Richard Mickelby's entrance amid a whirlwind of dramatic flair. His greatcoat flared open in a wide, sweeping arc, the thick wool panels slicing through the still air with a hushed whoosh, flinging droplets of rainwater that arsed glittering through the lamplight before splattering onto the parquet floor in darkening blooms. Each drop released a fresh burst of earthy rain smell, mingling with the room's scents. A razor-sharp draft chased him inside, cutting through the foyer's cloying warmth to raise goosebumps on scalps and bare forearms, laden with the crisp, ionized tang of thunder-churned clouds that stung the nostrils and evoked visions of splintered skies. Richard cut a striking figure, tall and lean from years of restless pursuits and carefully chosen indulgences, his broad shoulders thrown back in natural command, his jawline sharp as a honed blade beneath skin bronzed by distant hunts and sunlit escapades. His chestnut hair, slicked back under a sodden fedora that he doffed with theatrical flourish, sprang into unruly waves as it began to dry, framing a forehead lined with the subtle creases of constant scheming. His eyes, sharp agates flecked with amber, swept the room with predatory precision, while his mouth curved into that trademark grin, a beguiling mix of boyish mischief and underlying hunger that had felled business magnates and captivated beauties alike. "Darling Aunt Lavinia!" His voice boomed like the opening fanfare of a triumphant orchestra, rich with the polished tones of elite education, Eton quadrangles and Oxford towers, ricocheting from the beamed ceiling to embed itself in every listener's mind with irresistible pull. He closed the distance in 4 deliberate strides, his polished boots thudding rhythmically against the floorboards, the impacts pulsing up through his legs in time with the storm's distant drum. Lavinia Mickelby held court from behind her Sheraton desk, a bastion of burled walnut inlaid with gleaming brass, seated rigidly in a throne-like chair, upholstered in worn brocade that whispered faintly with her every shift. Silver threads wove through her severe chignon like frost on winter branches, pulled tight to accentuate the sharp angles of her aristocratic face, her skin pale and translucent as aged vellum, preserved by bloodline and iron will. A double strand of pearls encircled her throat, their luster muted, and her eyes, dark as storm clouds veined with unyielding resolve, fixed on him with the piercing judgment of one who had steered ancestral estates through wars and financial sieges, her thin lips pressed into a line that could silence servants with a glance alone. Richard swept into a deep, exaggerated bow, the motion fluid and theatrical, reminiscent of a swashbuckler from some long-forgotten operetta, capturing her hand with effortless grace. His lips brushed her knuckles in a kiss, drawn out just enough to convey intent, his warm breath contrasting sharply with the cool, papery texture of her skin, drawing a faint flush along her veins, a deliberate spark to melt ancient ice. Beneath the gallant display, his mind raced through strategies and risks. Keep it light, draw her in. She holds Geoffrey's secrets like a dragon guards its gold, the key to this whole tangled mess. Slip now, and Beatrice's wolves will descend, ripping apart the inheritance over Geoffrey's grave. He felt the underlying strength in her grasp, not frailty, but the coiled tension of a battle-hardened survivor who had outmaneuvered lawyers and lovers alike, and released her fingers with a lingering, thin touch. Lavinia's lips thinned to a razor edge, a subtle flare of her nostrils betraying her withdrawal as she withdrew her hand, her knuckles flexing with precise control. "Richard, must you always burst in as if the Solent itself were at your heels? Those poor hinges have endured lesser gales." Her words cut clean and commanding, shaped by the rigid etiquette of a bygone era, laced with a tremor of restrained irritation. Yet Richard caught the subtle softening, a twitch at the corners of her eyes, amusement battling annoyance, perhaps even a ghost of fondness for his irrepressible energy. A human whirlwind, always has been. Her thoughts drifted, pulling up faded memories of young Richard, freckled and bold, racing through these halls with pilfered bedsheets as sails, his laughter brighter than the chandeliers. But whirlwinds stripped the land bare. Geoffrey's will hangs like the sword of Damocles, salvation or ruin. Richard straightened with the smooth grace of a panther uncoiling, shrugging off his greatcoat in a cascade of wet fabric that rustled as it draped over a nearby armchair, rivulets of water tracing dark paths down the velvet to pool on the floor, soaking into the weave with a faint, darkening stain. The motion released another wave of damp wool and fresh rain scent, thickening the foyer's layered aromas. A gale? Nonsense, Aunt, merely a cheeky breeze bearing news and goodwill to rouse this noble tomb from its slumber. His gaze, pretended idle as it skimmed the frieze of carved vines high on the walls, snagged suddenly on the scene at the coat-stand. The iron rack loomed like a gnarled beast, its hooked prongs bent like arthritic claws, drooping under the weight of dripping coats. There, Beatrice Hargrove clutched her pearl necklace as if fending off Armageddon, her fingers whitening around the strand, veins bulging like dry riverbeds, her face contorted in sour fury, rouged cheeks blotched with red, lips pursed into a thin line of contempt, gaze hardened beneath dramatically arched brows drawn sharp with a makeup brush. The source of her venom hovered close by, Ravi Patel, the solicitor's precise aide from Bombay, carefully removing his steaming mackintosh to reveal a charcoal suit tailored with impeccable precision, its lines falling cleanly over his solid frame, exuding quiet dignity rather than flash. In his mid-40s, Ravi's skin glowed like polished mahogany under the lamplight, warm with an inner calm. A neat moustache framed his mouth, which curved into smiles only when earned. His eyes, deep pools edged with hard-won wisdom, took in the room steadily, tempered by boardroom battles and bustling markets alike. He hung his coat with deliberate care, the hooks tinkling softly like distant bells, appearing oblivious, or defiantly ignoring the hostility swirling around him, now intensified by the evaporating dampness and his faint scent of sandalwood and spices. Beatrice leaned toward Geoffrey, her whisper slithering out like venom from a hidden serpent, barely audible over the rain's roar. "Foreign taint, Geoffrey. It's seeping into every corner. First the kitchen help, now this. Defiling our sacred gathering." Her glare cut through the air like tempered steel, nostrils flaring, as if scenting some imagined impurity, tainting the beeswax and tobacco haze. The pearls ground against her throat with each labored breath, her posture rigid as a headmistress stamping out scandal, shoulders tense beneath her brocade bodice, which rustled with suppressed shudders. Geoffrey Hargrove loomed beside her, his once athletic build softened into prosperous bulk from endless banquets and idle scheming, jowls flushed like overripe plums, waistcoat straining over a belly that quivered slightly with each movement, its buttons glinting like medals of indulgence. He fiddled obsessively with his meerschaum pipe, its snarling bulldog bowl gleaming fiercely, the stem twirling in his thick fingers and scattering flecks of dark, malty tobacco onto the rug, where they smouldered briefly before dying out. A hearty laugh burst from his deep chest, loud enough to rattle the window panes and drown subtler currents. "Ha ha! Pure coincidence, my dear. Ravi's just popping into Kramer. Raymer, check the ledgers. All above board, eh? Right, old chap?" His eyes darted slyly toward the conservatory door, a shadowy archway where palm fronds rustled like conspiring whispers in the draught, but Ravi's attention stayed fixed on the pipe's antics, the signal lost in the smoky distraction. Ravi turned with the measured poise of a seasoned diplomat navigating minefields, bowing smoothly from the waist, his palms rising in a gesture of openness, balanced perfectly between respect and equality, rooted in ancient courtesies. "Mr. Hargrove, Mrs. Hargrove, a pleasure to see you again." His voice flowed smooth and rhythmic, edges crisp as fresh linen, inflections rolling like gentle waves from distant monsoons and crowded bazaars. Still, his gaze skimmed over them lightly, drawn instead to Geoffrey's fidgeting hands, missing the conservatory's leafy invitation entirely. Richard's polished facade cracked for an instant, a muscle in his jaw twitching like a bowstring pulled tight. Damn Beatrice's poisonous whispers. One whiff of Ravi's origins, and she rears up like a dog at carrion. Geoffrey's the real snake, that pipe a smokescreen for conservatory plots. Sorentonized prostration surged in his chest, a snag in his smooth campaign before it had truly begun. He drew a deep breath, drawing in the mix of wet wool, cherry tobacco, and underlying beeswax, then widened his smile into a radiant shield against the growing divide. "Hold steady, turn the venom to your advantage, use it as contrast." To mend the rift, he strode to the sideboard with the confidence of a lion claiming its domain, his fingers curling around a pilfered crystal tumbler, its cool, weighty base a reassuring anchor snatched from the library's stash. Brandy poured in generous measure, thick amber liquid uncoiling with scents of toasted almonds, bruised plums, and charred oak that sliced through the dampness like a hearth's promise. He raised it high, his arms sweeping in a grander arc that drew every eye, stray droplets flying free. One tinkling against Beatrice's pearls with a sharp asterisk plink, another blooming a wet stain on her cuff like an accusation. To family unity, his proclamation rang out bold and defiant, laced with irony, a gauntlet thrown into the rising fray. Inside, his thoughts churned wildly. Too much flair? Or just the mortar these crumbling bricks need before they crush me? Beatrice recoiled as if scolded, her hand flying to the damp silk, trembling with scolding outrage as the fabric clung stickily to her skin like a shameful mark. "You oafish brute! Look at this ruin, ruining perfect English silk with your buffoonery!" Her voice shattered like cracking ice, eyes blazing with layered fury, her earlier prejudice fueled by this physical affront, the wet spot chafing like sand in a wound. Insolent fop, sloshing his swill like a carnival drunk. And in front of him? Unbearable! Lavinia surged to her feet, the chair legs screeching across the parquet like a protest, her composure fraying like torn heirloom lace. "Enough of this farce, Richard. This isn't some vaudeville stage." She snatched the silver paper knife from her blotter, a slender blade engraved with the Mickelby crest, and rapped it sharply against the desk's edge. The crack echoed like a rifle shot, precise and commanding, chipping a thin curl of mahogany veneer that fluttered down like a fresh wound glistening in the light. "These squabbles will sink us all." Her mind swirled, haunted by visions of piling debts and splintering alliances amid the drifting brandy fumes. "We're here for Geoffrey's will, not to bicker like market fishwives." Ravi, who had begun a thoughtful pacing around the coat stand, his footsteps a soft murmur on the wood, navigating the emotional thickets, paused abruptly. He tilted his head toward Richard, palms opening in a gesture of calm solidarity, a silent counter to the bigotry poisoning the air. Their eyes met in a charged moment, thunder building closer now, shaking the chandelier into a frenzy of tinkling crystals. "Storms gather, but alliances forge in the depths," Ravi mused, recalling Calcutta negotiations where insults melted under persistence. "This wind will break. What remains endures." Diana Hargrove hovered at the room's edge, a bright spark amid the gloom. Slender as a young birch, her bobbed hair a cascade of corn silk strands catching glints like sunlit wheat. She twisted a lock around her finger in anxious spirals, betraying nerves beneath her carefree mask, her cheeks flushed soft pink, lips parted on a breathy exhale. "Richard, promise you won't rush back into that deluge. It's a biblical flood. You'd be swallowed whole." She drifted closer, her shoulder brushing his in a lingering press, warmth seeping through fabrics, her scent of fresh lily and warm musk wafting like an enchantment. The contact stretched, her lashes fluttering coyly as her eyes pleaded. "In this tomb of dusty rules, he's the spark that sets my blood racing." Her heart quickened, joy tangled with competitive edge, a sidelong glance toward Lavinia's fortress. Richard relished the electric touch, a thrill shooting up his arm amid the brandy's mellow haze. But Beatrice's mutter, now fully overheard, every sibilant word carving malice through the din, rekindled his anger. Foreign taint? Echo of empire's fever dreams? Charm the crone, or expose her rot? Gums. His temples pulsed with strain, this early test grinding against his suave exterior like grit in a fine mechanism. The fragile balance shattered anew as the door creaked open once more, admitting Inspector Lang without knock or invitation. Lean and wiry as a hunting hound nearing 60, his face was a weathered crag of basalt, etched by harsh northern winds, topped by pince-nez glasses that caught the chandelier's light and flashed like accusing beacons. Raindrops jeweled his gabardine coat, dripping rhythmically onto the floorboards. He tilted his head sharply at the group, his gaze dissecting them with clinical detachment, the lenses splintering light into probing spears that pinned each face in turn. "Evening all," Lang growled, his Midlands accent rough as sandpaper on silk against the foyer's refined tones. "Uninvited, but necessary. Geoffrey's will's stirring more dust than moths. Talk of forgeries thicker than the fog out there." Richard's mind raced into overdrive, his plan for a private plea discarded for a daring group deflection. He passed the brandy around, glasses clinking in reluctant harmony over the wind's wail, the clear chime sealing his bold play. Richard's heartbeat steadied as he offered the first glass to Lavinia, the liquid surface trembling from the draught, a soft glug punctuating his charm offensive. "Aunt, your barb's cut sharper than Biscay waves. Dramatics? No. Just the spice to flavor our family gathering. Without it, we'd starve on blandness alone." He winked conspiratorially, though his peripheral vision tracked Beatrice's escalating rage, the stain on her sleeve darkening as she rubbed futilely, her pearls heaving with each furious breath. Lavinia took the tumbler, lifting it to her nose where delicate vapors curled up, hints of caramelized sugar and sun-warmed plums teasing her senses, pursing her lips slightly. The first sip burned a welcome path down her throat, easing the chronic chill carved by years of lonely vigilance. Ever the rogue with the honeyed tongue. But Geoffrey's legacy swings like an executioner's blade. Gift or grave? Spice? More like grit in the gears, nephew. Park yourself before you upend everything. Her retort carried a grudging warmth, fingers tightening on the stem as old memories bubbled up, boyish Richard sneaking her decanters, grinning defiantly through scoldings. She paused, glass halfway to her lips, eyes narrowing in assessment. Or have those years overseas sharpened that tongue just for dodging? Richard let out a low chuckle, the sound rolling like approaching thunder, leaning in close enough for his breath to blend with the brandy's aroma. Sharpened, yes, but always in your service, Aunt. Remember those boyhood raids on your stash? Didn't they shape this taste? His fingers grazed hers lightly as he steadied the glass, an echo of the earlier kiss, probing the boundaries of sentiment. She met his gaze a moment longer, the paper knife still loosely gripped, its blade winking in the lamplight. A reluctant quirk tugged at her lip. Shaped a taste for mischief, that's certain. Sit down, Richard. We've weightier matters than nostalgia. Inside, the liquor spread a subtle heat, clashing with visions of hemorrhaging ledgers and circling heirs. Not seated yet, dear Aunt. First, a toast to our storm-braving comrade. Richard pivoted to Ravi, clapping his shoulder with hearty camaraderie, the thwack muffled by wool, warmth radiating through. Ravi, you legend, braving the flood for us, valiant as King Arthur himself. Ravi inclined his head, his mouth curving in precise amusement. Duty outweighs any gale, Mr. Mickelby, just a thread in the larger tapestry. Internally, he catalogued the dynamics. Beatrice's drilling stare like a surgeon's tool, Geoffrey's pipe dance a frantic diversion masking nerves. These currents are familiar. Bigotry circles the outsider, but composure reclaims ground. He accepted the glass with a nod, inhaling the brandy's deep, fruity notes against his own reserve sandalwood, then sipped carefully, eyes locked on Richard's. Your welcome softens the storm nicely. Softens? It conquers. Richard shot back, grin broadening, even as Beatrice's interruption loomed. Beatrice's composure splintered completely. Duty? Fresh from Bombay's teeming slums? Geoffrey, explain. Is this your grand estate revival? Next we'll be eating curry instead of roast beef. Her pitch rose, pearls clattering as her arm gestured wildly, the damp cuff chafing like a fresh nettle sting, fueling her tirade. Progress, he calls it, watering down our blood with colonial scraps. She spun fully on Geoffrey, chest heaving, finger prodding his breast. Speak up, husband, or will this invasion go unchallenged? Geoffrey drew deeply on his pipe, exhaling clouds of cherry-scented fog that veiled his ruddy face. Easy now, Beatrice, love. Ravi's here for the stock figures. Mantelpiece details. Pure chance with the reading. He patted his waistcoat pockets for matches, nudging Ravi toward the coat rack with fatherly pokes, eyes flicking sidelong to the conservatory, where fronds dripped heavily, laden with secrets. Her racket's ruining it. Need to get him alone soon. Sweat gleamed on his brow, pipe trembling. Matches? Dash it all, where? Geoffrey! Beatrice's tone sharpened to a whip crack, pearls audibly grinding. Chance! Your invitation stinks of plot. Servants gossip of changes, dilutions, our lineage's purity. Ravi bowed again, palms spreading in peace. Mrs. Hargrove, be assured, my duties honour tradition, alter nothing. Yet Geoffrey's pipe theatrics held his eye, obscuring the conservatory signal. Layers deepen. One wrong step, and you're adrift. He angled toward Geoffrey, tone even. Sir, the accounts, are they ready for review? Geoffrey waved airily, smoke wreathing. Soon enough, old fellow. Timing is key. Diana's laugh bubbled like fizzy cider, her finger twirling her hair faster, strands tightening with excitement. Papa, you're such a grump. Richard, ignore the squall. Stay for dinner. Cook's pheasant is drowned in juniper. Divine. She pressed nearer, shoulder molding to his side, heat blooming through cloth to warm her skin, breath feathering his ear like silk. Chaos on legs, jolting this fossilized bunch to life. Her hand slid to his elbow, squeezing gently, eyes flashing to Lavinia with teasing challenge. You have to, Richard. Night's just beginning, and your stories are the best part. Richard savoured the insistent pressure, a shiver amid the liquor's glow, but Beatrice's venom, now crystal clear, taint, echoing like a tolling bell, ignited fresh fury. Taint. I'll reveal the real poison when the codicils unfold. Jaw clenching, he raised his glass anew. To unity, let grudges evaporate like this fine spirit. Lavinia slammed the knife harder, wood splintering with a sharp snap that released a whiff of fresh timber. Richard, enough theatrics? Thunder crashed, lights flickering. Lang's arrival sliced the chaos, pince nez ominous. Unity? Fitting, with forgery whispers and wills wobbling. Glasses met in a cascade of clinks, Richard's gambit blooming amid the gale. The moment stretched, conversation unspooling slowly like vines in humid air. Richard faced Lavinia directly, glass poised. "Come on, Aunt. Think back to those golden summers. Croquet mallets flying wild, your laughter outshining the sunsets. We've survived worse than a brandy splash." His voice dropped intimate, eyes locking hers, probing for the crack in her armor, the spirits, scent bridging years. Lavinia's knife hand relaxed fractionally, blade hovering. Another sip grounded her, golden warmth strengthening her resolve. Sun-drenched days, pre-war bliss before Geoffrey's claws dug in. Memory tempts, danger lurks. She set the glass down with a firm thunk. Memories fade to sepia, Richard. Debts tower. Family fractures. Sit. The show tires. A hint of softening crept into her voice, tempered by vigilance. Or plan more, unifying, spills. Richard's laugh warmed, genuine. No more spills, promise. But unity, it's our lifeline, isn't it? He gestured broadly, eyes beseeching partnership. She exhaled quietly, lost in rain's drum. Lifeline or noose, tread carefully, nephew. Beatrice whirled on Geoffrey, whisper venomous, now clear. Chance! You summon intruders to our hearth. Maids whisper of tamperings, dilutions. Pearls swung like pendulums. Clammy silk her battle flag. Lunge pinning him against the rack. Breath ragged. Geoffrey puffed furiously, fog crowning his head. Beatrice, petal, calmly. Ravi's beyond reproach. Figures don't lie, nor bloodlines. Brow slick, pipe shaking, eyes darting to conservatory. Ravi sidetracked. Her noise torpedoes it. Hide him away. Strikers? Where the devil? Your forward thinking breeds chaos. Lineages muddied. Beatrice advanced, nails scraping his lapel. Geoffrey patted her awkwardly. Essential, love. Vision requires faith. Mentally, conservatory beckoned desperately. Ravi resumed his circuit, steps whispering on wood, dissecting the marital clash coolly. Bigotry's heart, predictable, navigable. Pivot, persist, fresh nod to Richard, palms bridging divides. Diana sidled to the arm of Richard's chair, thighs warmth pressing his. Awful crew, eh? Stay, dazzle us with city glamour, stage kisses, society whirl. Breath tickled his neck, eyes scheming and hungry, glance provoking Lavinia. My fire in this gloom, seize before fortunes shift. Richard's gut twisted tighter, Beatrice's jabs looping. Taint, infiltrating, empire's rotting gall. Geoffrey pulls strings, pipe his wand. He swigged brandy, stealing. Lang stepped forward, shadow stretching, boots squishing faintly. Beg pardon. Geoffrey, the will. Rumors fester. Forged clauses? Motives? Head cocked, insistent. Lenses probing each. Geoffrey coughed smoke. Inspector, bad timing, family sanctum. As timely as lightning, Lang replied, hat brim shedding drops. Richard pounced, distributing glasses. Unity before inquiries. Chimes rang, thunder-splitting sky. Lavinia clinked his. To endurance, then. Subtext clear, gambit acknowledged. Beatrice tapped sullenly, glowering. Geoffrey followed, pipe stilled. Ravi bowed gracefully. Diana beamed radiant. Lang watched, declining. Echoes blended with rain, Richard's strategy taking root in shadows. The foyer throbbed with aftershocks, talk fracturing into streams. Richard relished Lavinia's compliance, chime lingering in his palm. Endurance indeed. Aunt, Mickelby steel defies floods. He sank into a chair, legs sprawling, leather creaking, greatcoat steaming beside, glass held like a talisman. She peered over her rim, desk chip overlooked. Steel corrodes if ignored, Richard. Geoffrey reveals tomorrow. Witness it. Perpetual schemer. Friend or foe? Beatrice gripped Geoffrey's lapels, hiss overt. Witness? Law smells forgery? Banish him! Glare bored into Ravi, his pacing resuming. Geoffrey hushed. Wait, Bea. Conservatory soon. Trust me. Fingers twitched toward door. Ravi paused near Richard, murmur low. Unity strengthens, Mr. Mickelby. Palms evoked accord. Diana draped over armrest, thigh insistent. Papa's plots bore. Your adventures, Richard, enthrall us. Musk enveloped. Beatrice's taint replayed. Richard's knuckles whitened unseen. Twisted, stubborn. Lang centered, pince-nez sweeping. Unity amid will-forging gossip, odd deaths. Curious. Tension peaked, thunder punctuating. Lingering toasts, chimes affirming will. Strategy held, frayed but fierce, storm unrelenting. Subtleties sharpened. Lavinia placed glass with resonant thud. Inspector, propriety first. Geoffrey shortly. Knife tapped rhythm, mesmerizing. Lang quirked a thin smile. Propriety yields to facts. Miss Diana, observations? Diana lifted brow. Nothing but boredom's reign. Prod possessive at Richard. Beatrice erupted. Flirtations, outsider. Quiet, Geoffrey thundered. Pipe relit, fresh billows. Ravi nodded silent. Bond implied. Richard stood, empty. Refills, Unity thirsts. Rounds careful. No spills.
Laughter sparked Lavinia's grudging rumble. Diana's peal. Gambit morphed. Weaving bias. Probe.
Storm crested. Lightning etching faces gaunt. Rain veiling ceaseless. Foyer, once fraught, hummed tentative harmony. Richard's allure the thread. Yet undercurrents simmered, demanding nurture. Richard refilled Lavinia's, leaning confidential. Voice velvet. Aren't those idols? Your patience with my lost clubs, stray mallets. That grit forged us. Eyes earnest, probing. She breathed deep, nose to glass anew, heat spreading. Youth's shine persists, shadows lengthen. Forged, yes, but hardened by need. Heirs bicker, fortunes wane. Focus, Richard. Yielding evident. Knife idle. Beatrice harried Geoffrey aside. Barbs precise. Your modernity sows disorder. Bloodlines blur. Pearls choked breaths. Geoffrey wheezed smoke. Vital. Beer. See the future. Conservatory pleaded inwardly. Ravi looped closer, inserting velvet between pair. Sir, documents prepared? Deflection smooth. Diana whispered to Richard, lips brushing ear. After. Escape with me. Moonlit walks call. Heat rising. Lang circled, eyeing Diana. Boredom hides depths, miss. Recent quarrels? She purred. Family froth. Trifles. Beatrice sneered. Trifles? Intruders belittled. Thunder muttered, lights dimmed. Richard orchestrated, glasses circling. Refill ritual. Binds us. Chimes pealed. Cheer tentative. Geoffrey's guffaw, Lavinia's sniff. Ravi smiled. Lang arched brow. Gambit solidified. Tensions thickening toward storm. Prejudices simmering under fragile peace. Foyer breathed, alive with rift or reconciliation. Richard's charisma the fulcrum. Richard felt the room's pulse sync with his own as he watched the glasses circulate one final time, the brandy's amber glow reflecting fractured alliances in its depths. The air, heavy with tobacco wisps, rain-scented draughts, and the sharp tang of splintered wood from Lavinia's desk, seemed to hold its breath between thunder rolls. His initial theatrical entrance had cracked the ice, but the fractures ran deep. Beatrice's bigotry, a persistent thorn. Geoffrey's evasions, a thickening fog. Ravisi's quiet steadiness, an unexpected anchor. This toast isn't just deflection, it's the scaffold holding up the farce until Geoffrey's will cracks open. He caught Diana's lingering touch, her thigh's warmth a distracting promise amid the chill, while Lavinia's appraising stare weighed him like a scale. Lang's presence complicated it all, his pince-nez glinting like a predator's eyes, turning family theatre into potential crime scene. Beatrice muttered once more under her breath, though loud enough for the circle to catch fragments. Purity. Invasion. Her pearls clicking like impatient teeth. Geoffrey shushed her with a meaty hand on her arm, but his eyes betrayed panic, flicking repeatedly to the conservatory door where shadows danced like unspoken deals. Ravi, ever composed, met Richard's gaze again across the glasses, a subtle nod acknowledging the shared front against the tide. Diana's fingers trailed Richard's sleeve as she sipped, her breathy laugh a counterpoint to the storm's growl, eyes sparkling with mischief that masked sharper ambitions. Lavinia set her glass down last, the sound a punctuation. Enough indulgence. Inspector Lang, state your piece plainly. Geoffrey, the floor is yours soon enough. Her voice brooked no delay, the paper knife now sheathed in her fist like a scepter, its chipped edge a reminder of frayed patience. Internally, she wrestled the pull of Richard's charm against the ledger's red ink bleeding her thoughts. He stirs the old blood, but blood alone won't pay the bills. Lang adjusted his glasses, the metal frames clicking softly. Plainly then, whispers of altered clauses, suspicious timings around Geoffrey's health. Not accusing, yet, but wills don't rewrite themselves. His gaze lingered on Geoffrey, then swept to Richard, as if measuring the charmer's role in the script. Geoffrey cleared his throat, pipe forgotten in his lap. Gossip, Inspector. Estate matters, nothing criminal. Sweat traced his temple despite the chill. Richard interjected smoothly, raising his empty glass like a conductor's baton. To clarity then. May truth outshine shadows. The group obliged half-heartedly. Clink subdued, but the gesture bought time, weaving the threads tighter. As rain hammered anew, the foyer settled into uneasy truce, Richard's gambit not victory, but foothold in the gathering tempest. Richard watched Diana disappear up the staircase, her perfume lingering in the air. He didn't notice the shadow that detached itself from the alcove behind him, or the glint of silver in a gloved hand. Chapter 3. The drawing-room of Blackthorn Manor seemed to breathe out its own languid history, the air thick with the deep, pine-rich perfume of aged oak panelling that had absorbed decades of hearth smoke and whispered secrets. Beeswax polish gleamed dully on every mahogany surface, its waxy sheen catching the unsteady flicker of gaslight mantles that hissed quietly overhead, casting pools of amber light interspersed with encroaching gloom. The walls, papered in deep crimson damask, bore the weight of stern ancestral portraits. Oils of long-dead Blackwoods in powdered wigs and lace cravats, their painted eyes glinting with a predatory gleam that appeared to track every movement in the room. Heavy velvet drapes, fringed with tarnished gold tassels, framed the leaded casement windows, through which the storm outside unleashed its primal fury. Rain hammered against the glass in relentless sheets, each drop exploding like a miniature percussion, while howling winds clawed at the panes, sending icy drafts whispering across the floorboards and rustling the edges of the thick Axminster rug. Thunder rolled in from the moors like the growl of some ancient beast awakening beneath the earth, vibrating up through the polished parquet and into the bones of those gathered. Lightning forked across the blackened sky in brilliant, jagged veins, momentarily bleaching the room in stark white before plunging it back into shadow play. Silhouettes twisting like malevolent spirits on the walls. The atmosphere hung oppressively thick, laced with the pungent earthiness of pipe tobacco curling from active bowls, the musty dampness of woolen overcoats dripping from hooks by the door, and the sharp electric bite of static crackle infiltrating every crevice, a harbinger of the chaos beyond. Captain Elias Lang positioned himself before the carved mantelpiece, its marble shelf cool and unyielding beneath his steepled fingers, pressed together with the precision of a man assembling a puzzle from disparate shards. The gold signet ring on his right hand, a family crest from his colonial service, engraved with a rampant lion, flared briefly in the firelight, a subtle emblem of inherited duty. At 45, Lang embodied a quiet, restrained authority. Tall and lean as a hunting whipcord, his frame honed by years under equatorial suns and monsoon rains in distant outposts. His face bore the patina of experience. High, sharp cheekbones shadowed beneath a neatly trimmed mustache the color of gunmetal, eyes like polished slate, cool and penetrating behind the thin wire frames of his half-moon glasses. Those eyes missed nothing. They catalogued textures, the infinitesimal betrayals of flesh and fabric. His black evening tails hung impeccably straight, the silk lapels brushing his starched collar without a crease, a deliberate contrast to the rumpled disarray of his fellow guests, scattered like chess pieces across the room's opulent furniture. Beneath that poised exterior, coiled a tension akin to a watch-spring wound too tight. Muscles taut along his jaw, breath measured in shallow sips of the room's stifling air. He was no idle participant in this storm-trapped assembly. He was the fulcrum, the unseen axis upon which suspicions turned, his mind a relentless engine sifting civility for the grit of motive. Lang's gaze, steady as a rifle sight, first fixed upon Diana Hargrove, who perched on the very edge of a voluptuous chaise long upholstered in faded burgundy velvet, her posture a masterpiece of calculated nonchalance. In her mid-30s, she was a study in deliberate allure. Skin like fine porcelain warmed to a subtle rose by the fire's proximity, auburn hair artfully piled in loose curls that cascaded over one shoulder, from which she plucked a single strand to twist idly around her forefinger. The gesture was rhythmic, almost hypnotic. Her manicured nail, painted a daring scarlet, catching the light as it wound and unwound the lock, releasing it only to select another. She leaned forward toward Richard Thorne with a subtle arch of her spine, the silk of her emerald gown whispering against the chaise's plush, her décolletage rising gently with each breath. Her laughter emerged low and throaty, bubbling up like champagne poured too hastily from an iced bottle, effervescent, yet laced with an undercurrent of calculation. Richard, broad-shouldered and ruggedly handsome in his weathered tweed suit, the fabric still bearing faint salt stains from coastal winds, responded with a wolfish grin that crinkled the corners of his hazel eyes. His large hand gestured expansively, palm upturned as if offering invisible treasures, recounting in booming tones some fresh triumph in his shipping ventures. Diana's eyes, vivid green as shattered sea glass, widened in feigned rapture, lashes fluttering like moth wings, but Lang detected the telltale micro-twitch at the corner of her full mouth, a fleeting purse that spoke volumes of artifice. Flirtation as camouflage, Lang pondered, his internal ledger flipping open to a fresh page, inked with the frailties of human pretense. Diana Hargrove is no wide-eyed ingenue. That habitual hair twirl is a relic from her days treading the boards in Drury Lane melodramas, rehearsed 1,000 times to disarm skeptical audiences. But directing it at Richard Thorne? The man holds the estate's solicitor in his pocket, whispers that could unravel wills and codicils. Is she angling for confirmation of her late husband's overlooked clauses, perhaps a forgotten bequest buried in legalese, or merely diverting scrutiny from her own shadowed corners? The speculation settled in his mind like fine silt at the bottom of a prospector's pan, heavy and opaque. He shifted his glasses minutely, the cool metal frames pressing into the bridge of his nose, a grounding sensation amid the room's sensory assault. His steepled fingers tightened imperceptibly, knuckles blanching under the skin, as the fire's radiant heat licked at his shins through his trousers, contrasting the chill draft slithering up his spine. Across the expansive room, where the coffered ceiling arched like the ribs of some great beast, Geoffrey Blackwood's voice erupted through the layered din, a forced heartiness that reverberated off the plasterwork, competing with the storm's muffled roar. The bluff industrialist was a portly figure in his late 50s, his ruddy face glistening with a perpetual sheen of perspiration, jowls quivering as he mopped his brow with a linen handkerchief already darkened and limp from overuse. Beads of sweat traced erratic paths from his receding hairline, vanishing into the starched collar of his white shirt, which bulged uncomfortably against the roll of his neck, buttons straining like overtaxed rivets. "By Jove, what a tempest out there," he bellowed, the words tumbling out in a rush, his cheeks inflating with the effort. He clamped his briar pipe between tobacco-yellowed teeth, the stem slick with his palm's moisture, and puffed vigorously. The bowl glowed cherry red, but his sweat-slick grip betrayed him. The pipe tilted precariously, spilling a cascade of fine grey ash that fluttered down like polluted snow, scattering across the Axminster rug's intricate floral medallions. The particles embedded themselves in the wool fibers, staining the crimson and gold threads with dark, irregular blooms. Subtle discolorations that drew the immediate disapproving notice of Beatrice Whitby, who sat rigidly in a nearby wingback chair, her posture as unyielding as a marble statue. Geoffrey puffed harder, his barrel chest expanding and contracting with laboured heaves, the sharp tang of his Latakia tobacco sharpening the room's already cloying haze. "I've weathered worse in the shipyards of Liverpool. Mark my words. Gales that swallow a man whole and spit out his boots. Remember that clipper off Cape Horn, eh? Sails shredded like wet paper, timbers groaning like the damned. We lashed ourselves to the masts, waves crashing over us like God's own wrath." His laughter exploded outward, a harsh bark that dissolved midway into a rattling cough, phlegm bubbling audibly in his throat as he doubled over slightly, one hand pressing against his midriff. He dabbed at his mouth with the sodden handkerchief, leaving translucent smears on the cuff of his sleeve, the fabric darkening further. Lang's mental catalogue advanced with mechanical precision, each observation slotted into place. Profuse perspiration in such temperate conditions, scarcely the fire's doing. This is nerves gnawing from within, not mere exertion. Geoffrey's boasts ring as hollow as an empty hull. That spilled pipe ash stains more than the rug. It's a glaring tell of unsteady hands. Tremor in the grip? Perhaps the residue of Limehouse opium dens, where merchants drown debts in poppy haze. Or the inexorable pile-up of his own financial ledgers, towering like thunderheads ready to burst. Time aggressed? A private irony tugged at Lang's lips, unseen beneath his moustache, as the scent of Geoffrey's tobacco mingled unpleasantly with the beeswax polish, creating a cloying fog that clung to his nostrils. Beatrice Whitby, Geoffrey's sharp-featured sister-in-law, compressed her thin lips into a bloodless seam of outright disapproval, her steel-grey eyes locked unblinkingly on Noor Khalil across the low tea table inlaid with mother-of-pearl. Noor, the vibrant young artist recently returned from the bohemian whirl of Montmartre, conducted her fervour with sweeping arm gestures, her sketchpad teetering precariously on one knee, as if balanced by sheer will. Her ink-stained fingers clutched a stub of charcoal, knuckles smudged black, as she dashed hasty lines across the rough paper, capturing the group's visages in a frenzy of strokes. Bold hatches for shadows, feverish smears for highlights. Stray locks of raven dark hair rebelled against her haphazard chignon, framing a face alight with olive-skinned passion. High cheekbones flushed with exertion, eyes like polished onyx, sparking with unbridled defiance. The cuffs of her threadbare blouse hung frayed and unraveling at the wrists, pale threads dangling like frayed nerves, a poignant emblem of fortunes eroded by unpaid studio rents and impulsive Parisian splurges. "These English faces," Noor declared, her voice a lilting cascade infused with the melodic cadences of French boulevards and Levantine souks, rising above the room's murmurs like a clarion. She flung one arm wide, charcoal dust puffing into the air, her other hand slashing emphatically across the page. So stiff, so dour, like waxworks exhumed from Madame Tussauds crypts. Look at you all, portraits starving for colour, for pulse, for life itself. The force of her stroke sent her elbow colliding with a porcelain saucer on the table, the delicate china clinking sharply against its matching underplate, a teaspoon rattling in protest. Beatrice's glare intensified, her narrow frame rigid as a corseted rail in the wingback chair, gloved hands clenched in her lap like a magistrate's folded verdict. The sharp, cloying aroma of her lavender sachets emanated from her person, slicing through Noor's faint personal nimbus of solvent sharp as pine resin, and the smoky allure of clove cigarettes pilfered from Montmartre cafes. "Paris vices," Beatrice hissed, pitching her voice just loud enough to traverse the space between them, each syllable a whipcrack laced with the acid of Victorian propriety. Her lips pursed into an even thinner line, nostrils flaring delicately, as if Noor's very vitality were a contaminating miasma invading her pristine sphere. Noor froze mid-stroke, the charcoal hovering like a suspended guillotine blade, her dark eyes widening in mock incredulity before narrowing to slits of amusement. She tossed back her head, throat exposed in a vulnerable arc, and unleashed a laugh that peeled through the room like shattering crystal. High, defiant notes that cut the tension momentarily. "Vices, madame? Pah! It is vivacity you fear, the breath of true art that your musty galleries have long forgotten. Dust and death choke your walls. My sketches, they breathe, they pulse with the chaos you dare not embrace." She resumed her flailing with renewed vigor, arms carving the air as punctuation, the sketchpad quivering under the assault. Beatrice's cheeks mottled with a rising tide of pink, her bony fingers twisting viciously at the lace edging of her cuff, the fabric protesting with faint ripping threads. This girl's impropriety is a veritable blight upon decent society, asterisk she seethed inwardly, her gaze boring like augers into Noor's animated form. Flailing about like some vulgar street mime from the Folies Bergère, those cuffs as ragged as her suspect morals. Paris has not merely ruined her, it has unleashed a contagion. Lang absorbed the skirmish from his vantage, fingers maintaining their steepled vigil, the fire's convective heat now prickling his skin with insistent warmth, beads of sweat threatening at his own temples but held in check by sheer discipline. Beatrice's glare indicts far beyond aesthetics. It's laced with the venom of jealousy for youth's unbridled fire, or perhaps terror that Noor's unfiltered gaze might pierce the veneered hypocrisies riddling this family like dry rot in old beams. The verbal joust was interrupted by a rhythmic tapping that intruded like a metronome set to discord. Lavinia Blackwood's foot, encased in supple polished leather, drumming a staccato cadence against the parquet floor concealed beneath the tea-table's lace runner. The widow sat with the upright poise of a dowager queen, her silver-streaked hair drawn into a severe matronly chignon that tugged at her temples, emphasizing the fine lines etched by recent grief. Her black bombazine gown rustled faintly with each subtle shift, the fabric's dull sheen absorbing rather than reflecting the light, a somber shroud. Her face presented a flawless mask of composed sorrow. Pale patrician features, high forehead unmarred by furrow, lips a bloodless curve. But Lang's keen observation caught the faint tremor rippling through her long fingers as they adjusted the lace collar at her throat, deftly concealing the crumpled edge of a letter protruding half an inch from her sleeve cuff. Lang narrowed his eyes, his voice a quiet probe. "That letter in your sleeve, it's got you rattled, doesn't it? Fresh ink like that doesn't lie." She hesitated, her fingers tightening on the collar before she forced a brittle smile. "You're imagining things, Mr. Lang. It's just an old note, nothing more." He leaned in slightly, watching her eyes flicker. "Old? The creases are sharp as a fresh wound. What's it hiding? Regrets? Or something worse?" The paper's ink was fresh, its creases sharp with recent fury. Resentments bubbled there, potent as undiluted bitters. "Tea, if you please," Lavinia declared, her voice emerging cool and crystalline as spring rain pattering on slate, though the tapping of her foot quickened for a staccato burst, an involuntary betrayal of the tempest raging beneath her poise before resuming its measured beat. From the shadowed doorway, a maid materialized like a spectre, her starched apron crackling softly, bearing a massive silver tray that gleamed with polished menace. The aroma of Darjeeling tea, unfurled in steaming tendrils, rich and malty with undertones of bergamot, intertwining with the buttery allure of fresh scones cooling on a tiered stand, their golden crusts split to reveal fluffy interiors, and the piquant sharpness of lemon curd dolloped in porcelain ramekins, its citrus tang cutting through the room's heaviness like a knife. The assembly stirred to life with a symphony of domestic sounds. Fine bone china cups clinking delicately against saucers etched with the Blackwood crest, silver teaspoons tinkling as lumps of sugar were coaxed from a cut crystal bowl, murmurs of thank you and "do pass the milk" weaving through the air. Steam curled upward in lazy spirals, veiling faces momentarily, as the group availed themselves of the respite. Ravi Singh, the East India merchant, leaned forward from the depths of his leather armchair, the supple hide sighing under his weight, his silk kurta, a vibrant saffron embroidered with golden paisleys, whispering silkily against the upholstery. Lithe and poised even at 50, his skin gleamed like polished teak under the gaslight, eyes lined with subtle coal-sharp as obsidian daggers honed for trade negotiations. He drew deeply on his hookah, the glass base bubbling with a liquid gurgle, exhaling tendrils of apple-scented smoke that wove intricate arabesques through the lamplight, sweet and spiced with cardamom whispers. "In my homeland," Ravi said, his voice a steady voice that sliced through the chatter like a sitar string plucked in a crowded bazaar, resonant and layered, "we have a proverb. The elephant tramples the parlor long before the mouse deigns to notice the crumbs upon the floor." The words lingered, weighted with proverb's ancient wisdom, subtext blooming like monsoon night bloom scent, hints of his global savvy, the invisible threads of commerce binding Blackthorn's shipping fortunes to Calcutta's teeming docks. Lang tilted his head fractionally, the movement precise, his glasses catching a glint from the mantelpiece candles, igniting a spark of genuine interest in his slate-grey eyes. He unsteepled his fingers slowly, extending one hand in a gesture toward the storm-lashed windows, where rain traced rivulets down the glass like frantic tears. "An elephant loose in this particular parlor, Mr. Singh? Pray, what crumbs have you discerned scattered amid the wreckage?" His tone remained even, a velvet glove over investigative steel, inviting without demanding. Ravi's lips curved into a sly crescent moon smile, teeth flashing brilliant white against his dark beard. He inhaled another languid pull from the hookah, holding the smoke in his lungs for a deliberate count of 3 heartbeats before exhaling in a controlled plume that mushroomed toward the ceiling, dissipating into delicate wisps. "Ah, Captain Lang, discernment is the merchant's creed. This storm, it conceals much beneath its bluster. But elephants, they leave unmistakable footprints, Trade routes slyly shifted under cover of fog, fortunes quietly rerouted like caravans evading tolls. One must ever watch the parlor floor for those impressions, lest the crumbs multiply into avalanches. His eyes locked with Lang's, a subtle challenge swathed in layers of urbane courtesy, the hookah's fruity incense now permeating Lang's senses. Commerce's intricate needs, laid bare in proverb form, Lang reflected, drawing an involuntary breath of the hookah's sweet spice, which coated his tongue like sugared fruit. Ravi Singh is no mere idle philosopher, spinning tales for amusement. That lilting cadence veils ledgers meticulously balanced in sweltering Calcutta counting houses, debts intertwined with the Blackwoods, like hemp ropes on a clipper's rigging. Does the proverb serve as warning to the unwary, or a veiled boast of his own maneuvering prowess? The room's undercurrents thickened palpably, the air growing denser, as Viktor Kuznetsov prowled into the thickening fray from the periphery, his massive strides thudding against the rug with the weight of forge hammers on anvil. The Russian émigré loomed at 6'4", broad as a Cossack bear, his coarse linen shirt stretched taut over corded shoulders and arms scarred from the brutal labor camps of Siberia, puckered white ridges twisting like frozen rivers across his forearms. A grey-streaked beard framed a jaw like quarried granite, and his rough accent boomed forth as he slammed a ham-sized fist onto the mahogany tea table, sending crystal decanters jumping, sherry sloshing in amber waves that threatened to spill, the liquid's nutty bouquet spiking sharply. "This house, it is mine by blood's unyielding claim," Victor thundered, veins bulging like knotted ropes along his bull neck, spittle flecking his beard, the air around him heavy with the raw reek of cheap vodka and the oily tang of machinery from his émigré workshop. Blackwood swore it on his honor. "My grandmother's dowry stones built these very walls. Lineage demands restitution now." Richard Thorne straightened in his seat with a jolt, color leaching from his tan cheeks to leave them ashen, his wolfish grin evaporating into a taut line. Diana's manicured hand fluttered dramatically to her throat, fingers splaying over pearls, her green eyes widening in theatrical alarm, though Lang noted the opportunistic flicker beneath. Geoffrey spluttered on a mouthful of pipe smoke, erupting into a convulsive cough that sprayed fresh ash, his handkerchief whipping out in frantic defense. "Steady on there, old chap. Steady on," Geoffrey blustered, his voice pitching unnaturally high, cracking like overburdened timber. But Victor advanced a step, his shadow swallowing the table, fist grinding deeper into the wood, knuckles blanching to bone white. Promises scrawled in fading ink dissolve like snow, blood endures eternal, unbreakable, Victor growled, his breath gusting hot and beery across the assembly, close enough that the group recoiled subtly, chairs scraping faintly. Lang's pulse accelerated by a mere fraction, discernible only to himself, like the subtle tick of his pocket watch. But his granite expression fractured not a whit, eyes narrowing behind glasses, lineage wielded as a battering ram, yet Victor's prowling strides betray raw desperation more than innate dominance. That thunderous fist thump rattles crystal and nerves alike, but observe how his eyes dart sidelong, pupils dilating, fear of outright rejection, or the gnawing dread of exposure for forged lineage papers smuggled from Petrograd. In the midst of this uproar, Salam Adebayo sat in serene detachment by the bay window, where storm light filtered through in pallid shafts, twirling her stethoscope idly between slender, capable fingers, the rubber tubing coiling and uncoiling with a soft, hypnotic squeak against her tailored suit. The Ethiopian physician cut an elegant figure, ebony skin glowing warm in the firelight's caress, her crisp, white collar framing a poised neck, full lips curved in the faintest arc of detached amusement. Her unflinching gaze roved the group methodically, clinical as a surgeon's scalpel, lingering on Geoffrey's perpetually slick brow, Victor's throbbing temples pulsing visibly. "Tempers ignite like uncontrolled fevers," Salem observed, her voice smooth and resonant as the Nile's eternal flow, carrying across the tumult without elevation. "I see pulse rates elevated board-wide, racing hearts, flushed extremities. Perhaps a soothing draught of cordial before dinner restores equilibrium." Her eyes met each in turn, the stethoscope's brass bell glinting idly. Nor snorted derisively, her sketchpad slamming shut with a resounding thud that dispersed a fresh cloud of charcoal dust motes dancing in the gaslight. "Fevers? Ha! These so-called portraits are the true affliction," stale as week-old bread left to moulder in a crypt. Frayed cuffs hiding pinched wrists, false smiles masking gritted teeth. I could paint the truths lurking beneath, and shatter every gilt frame in this mausoleum. Her arms resumed their wild flail, cuffs riding up to expose threadbare wrists, veined with faded ink tattoos from Parisian ateliers, every snag and pull a testament to mounting debts. Geoffrey, rallying from his coughing fit, boomed louder in a bid to recapture dominion over the discourse. Absolute nonsense, girl. Blackwood portraits are sacrosanct tradition, pillars of our heritage. But his voice splintered disastrously on the culminating high note, fracturing like thin spring ice underfoot, deep furrows etching his brow as strain clawed visibly at his features. He dabbed at his face with renewed fury, the handkerchief a sodden rag, fresh ash flaking from his pipe to mottling the rug further in grey constellations. Lavinia rose with fluid grace, her foot tapping ceasing abruptly like a guillotine's fall, poise reasserting itself as an impenetrable shield. Enough of this discord. The storm conspires to delay dinner. Let us compose ourselves like civilized souls. Lang excused himself with unobtrusive murmur, gliding to the shadowed embrasure of the bay window, where encroaching dusk and storm clouds wove accusing fingers of shadow across the sills. He lifted a crystal glass of untouched cordial from a side table, the cherry syrup viscous and cloyingly sweet on his tongue, coating it with tart warmth that spread through his chest despite the draught fingering the hairs at his nape like ghostly breaths. The patter of rain accelerated to an impatient tattoo on the glass, lightning pulsing to illuminate the manor's facade. Or was it the east wing mirroring the west in deceptive symmetry? He pivoted slowly, gaze alighting on the mantel clock, its brass case ornate with cherubs and vines. The pendulum swung in erratic arcs, tormented by gusts infiltrating the chimney flue, the chimes emerging languidly, lagging precisely 2 minutes behind the true hour. Lang fished his pocket watch from his waistcoat. Solid gold hunter case, its reliable tick thrumming steadily against his palm, chain cool on his knuckles, layout inconsistencies crystallizing, asterisk he catalogued, synapses firing like storm synapses. Clock's lag sowed by wind-warped pendulum, alibi shatter on such fragile seeds. The east corridor's chimes ordinarily synchronize, but this distortion, 2 minutes could cloak a furtive departure, a clandestine rendezvous in shadowed halls, movements masked by thunder's veil. The group milled in restless eddies, voices overlapping in a polyphonic cacophony threaded with unspoken subtexts. Geoffrey's bluster fading to mutters, Nor's charcoal scratching resuming furtively, Victor's heavy breathing subsiding to grunts. Lang retraced his steps to the mantel, fingers resteepled with deliberate tightness over the bridge of his glasses, shedding the guise of casual friend like a discarded Inverness cape, his head tilted forward in a piercing incline, committing fully to the detective's unsparing scrutiny amid the storm's escalating howl. "Diana," he commenced quietly, his voice threading through the din like a needle's point, drawing her gaze from Richard's side. She turned languidly, the habitual hair twirl halting mid-revolution, her green eyes sharpening to wary emeralds. That particular lean toward Mr. Thorne. Is it admiration for his vaunted ventures, or rather a subtle mapping of escape routes from this interminable tempest? Diana's laughter tinkled forth like spun glass, brittle at the edges, her fingers clenching convulsively around the ivory fan at her wrist, ribs creaking faintly. "Captain Lang, you persist as the evening's poet laureate, merely passing the time in idle converse, as one does when winds conspire against us." Her posture shifted minutely, shoulders drawing back, chin lifting in defensive poise. "Time," Lang echoed meditatively, his gaze drifting to the errant mantel clock, pendulum mocking with its sway, a commodity that lags curiously here, precisely 2 minutes adrift, courtesy of the wind's meddling. Curious happenstance, wouldn't you agree? Alibis so often erected upon the chimes of clocks, fragile as they prove. Richard interjected brusquely, his brow furrowing into deep furrows, tweed sleeve rasping as he leaned forward. "What utter rot is this, Captain? The storm's buffeting the whole blasted house. Clocks, nerves, everything." Geoffrey nodded vigorously, paling further, his handkerchief twisting in damp knots. Beatrice stiffened anew, gloved hands vice-like. Nor ceased her flailing abruptly, charcoal poised. Lavinia's foot resumed its faint tapping, irregular now. Ravi exhaled a contemplative smoke ring. Victor unclenched his fist with a creak of knuckles. Selam inclined her head as if confirming a diagnosis. Lang's gaze encompassed them all in a slow, inexorable sweep, glasses glinting ominously. Curious indeed, one might say suspiciously so. Shall we linger a moment longer on elephants trampling parlors, on portraits concealing truths, on all these scattered crumbs before dinner summons us? The room plunged into a profound hush, broken only by thunder's distant percussion rolling across the moors, shadows deepening inexorably as Lang's probing tendrils began to unfurl, ensnaring the assembly in their grasp. The drawing-room fell silent. But in that silence, Inspector Lang heard something that made his blood run cold. A faint clink of glass against glass from the direction of the tea service. Someone was still in the house who shouldn't be,